I'm reminded too of a great story of a friend of ours by the name of Father Bill Burke. I don't know how many of you know Father Bill Burke. He's one of the most creative priests in the diocese. But he had an opportunity, I'll never forget this. He met Bishop Sheen, okay, now, the Bishop Sheen, you know, and Bishop Sheen was very small. You know that, he's a very tiny guy. He met him in the elevator at the cathedral rectory. And so he was like standing in awe. There was Bishop Sheen, you know, the TV star. And he said, Bishop Sheen, and he was in the seminary at the time, he said, Bishop Sheen, do you have any advice for a man who's studying in the priesthood? And Bishop Sheen, you know, stood up as tall as he could, looked at him and just went, read! And then walked away. So I guess the most important thing for us to do is read. I mean, if we want to, you know, so I think you got to talk about, is there a willingness on your part to learn and to grow? And I think that's an important part of being a disciple. But I can tell you from my lived experience, is once I made a commitment to try to put Christ in the center of my life, I just had this burning desire to read as much as I could and to learn all sorts of things. And I think that's an important thing. So you got to look at the stuff that you have, you know, so your pastor gives you a good book to read, you know, every now and then. You guys got to find books on your own too, because he's not going to be passing out those books free forever, you know. But now the meditation book you have, do you get a Bishop Morneau's book? Did you all get that book? Are you using Bishop Morneau's book? Okay, did you pass that out to everybody? They all got a free copy? I gave my people the black book because that was a lot cheaper than the Morneau book. But I mean, but I tell them to you know, the little black book is a book we use to meditate for 7 minutes a day. Morneau's book is excellent. If you have that, I hope you're using it because he's got some incredible insights and it certainly can help your prayer life. But I just think that, you know, you pass out Morneau's book, it's an excellent book. So you've got a lot of resources, but you should be able to find those resources on your own. So what are the books that you're reading? I think you need to think about that. And a disciple is a lifelong learner, and we got to work at that. We can't stop learning. I think that's an important thing. And then, of course, the more you learn, there's going to be more tension and struggle in your life. You will recognize how far we all fall short of Christ, who must be in our center. You know, it's not easy, I think, to follow the Gospels today. I think it is the most challenging thing you and I could do. You know, when Jesus says something about turn the other cheek, love your enemies, pray for your persecutors, he's not kidding. And that creates some real tension and struggle within each and every one of us. You know, can I really do what Jesus wants me to do? You know, I think it was C.S. Lewis who once said, you know, Christianity has never failed. It's never been tried. But to really take the gospel and try to live by it, I think will create tremendous tension and struggle in our life. And we have to learn to live with that. We have to try to work at it as best we can. And that's part of that tension and struggle that we will have to live with. And then I did spend time talking about prayer. I think that that's an important facet, of course, of a discipleship. One thing I didn't talk about, though, are the Psalms. You know, if you want to know what the prayer book that Jesus used, pray the Psalms. That was his prayer book, when you think about it. Because those Psalms were the prayers the people of Israel prayed on a regular basis. That's why, for the priests, that's part of our divine office. So, you know, when our class gets together, you know, we have our day off, we begin our day with prayer. We pray together on vacation or in the house, or, you know, I pray with my associates, the office in the morning. But I'm always fascinated with the Psalms, because if you really want to know how Jesus prayed, read the Psalms and understand and try to read them as you could imagine Jesus was reading them. But it's his prayer book. And I think that's another beautiful facet of prayer. So the beautiful purpose of the divine office is to go through all 150 Psalms every week. You know, so I just think that that's something we should do. But I think it's an important thing for you to think about, you know, your own prayer life, to how do you enhance it, what do you do to change it. But you might want to consider the Psalms in your own life. I think because that's a beautiful prayer. That's the Jewish prayer book. And Jesus was basically primarily a wonderful Jew who was committed to following Yahweh to the best of his ability. And he prayed that Psalms all the time. Do you use the Psalms for your prayer life? An important thing to consider. You know, and then other forms of prayer, but I think that's an important thing. And then last but not least is identifying with Jesus in his death and resurrection. Okay, this is probably a critical piece. You might remember Jesus defines discipleship. He says, if you want to follow me, you have to deny yourself, take up the cross, and then you can follow me. What does it mean to deny yourself? And Jesus says in that same phrase, and in close to that, it says, the person who loses his life will save it, and the person who saves his life will lose it. What does he mean? He means that our ego must die, and he must be put in our center. But if we are to deny ourselves, we have to let go of our ego and to put Christ in our center. That's the first part. All right? And I think that's the big challenge. And the wonderful thing is, and most of us are in that category, it's in the second half of life is the only time you can really do it. Because for the first half of your life, you got to build up your ego. And you got to try to figure out who you are and what you do. It's at the second half of your life where you can let it go. And that's a wonderful time for everybody here. I would think, yeah, if I look upon this, we're in the second half of life, most of us. Okay? But you got to let the ego die and put Christ in the center. And that's the big challenge. Are you willing to let your ego go and to put him in your center? So that's denying yourself. And then he says to take up the cross. And that's all about suffering. And what he says we have to do is embrace suffering in our life. And that's not easy. Nobody wants it. And so often I think we ask ourselves, why does a person have to suffer? Toughest thing I had to do this week is talk to the mom. Today, I called her today. This was a tough thing. I was here Sunday afternoon. I'll never forget this. And this woman called me on my cell phone. And her nephew is 22 years old and has been told that there's nothing more they can do for his cancer. He has bone cancer. So they have to put him in hospice. And she said, would you go talk to him? And it was the toughest thing. I mean, I don't, what do I say to a 22-year-old kid who's got, who's on, got a couple of weeks? It's one of the challenges of our job, I think. So, I mean, I really had to pray about this. But I did finally call, and I talked to his mom today. And it's awful for them, I mean, this kid's been through surgeries for the last 18 months. Taking out body parts, changing this, changing that, 22, and he finally finished at the cancer treatment, and they said, we can't do anything more for you. It's finished. You better go home and get to hospice. So he's 22 years old. So that's part of the suffering, and I cannot answer the question, why does Nathan have to suffer? Can't answer the question of suffering. The only thing you and I can answer about suffering is, now that this has happened to us, what are we going to do about it? That's the question we can answer. But Jesus says we have to embrace the cross. And I think that's an important piece of identifying with Jesus in the dying and rising. Is that we have to deny ourselves, we have to embrace the cross, and we have to realize that that's not the end of the story. In our life, there are a lot of things that have to die, not just our physical life, but there's lots of things that have to die. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Father Ronald Rolheiser's book, The Holy Longing. I know Father Bob said he's reading it with a special group. Anybody, a lot of people read that book. The Holy Longing, I would tell you, if you read one book, I've read it 7 times because I really like it. And sometimes I'm a slow learner to get inside. But Father Rolheiser has some incredible things in there. And he talks about the spirituality of the Paschal Mystery. And he points out the fact that there are some things in our life that we need to let die and bury before we can move on. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think people carry a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, a lot of dreams, a lot of disappointments, and they don't bury it. They don't let it die. And the only way that's going to happen, as Father Rolheiser says, is we have to identify with Jesus in his dying and rising. You've got to bury some of this stuff so that you can rise up as a new person. And I think that's an important thing for everybody here to think about. You know, is there something in your life that you're carrying right now that is really preventing you from moving forward and growing in your life? And I think the important thing to remember is that if we're going to identify with Jesus' dying and rising, the Paschal mystery, we got to bury it. You know, and it's Father Rolheim's very good. You know, he talks about the death of our youth. He said some people just aren't, you know, there's happy 70-year-olds and then there's very unhappy 70-year-olds, you know, or those people who do not admit they want that they're 70 or 80 or you know, 85. And, you know, and it's the Botox thing, you know, where they just have the perpetual smile and they just can't, you know, they just don't want anybody to see how old they're looking. Well, they're old, you know, and you got to bury it. You got to accept the fact you're getting old, you know, it doesn't happen. So bury it. I mean, you just got to move on and be happy that you can move, you know. I think that's what you got to do. And be grateful for that, you know. But some people just don't want to bury the fact of that. And then he talked about the death of our wholeness, you know, and that's so true. I think some people have been so seriously wounded in their life. I have a friend of mine who's a doctor. He is one of the most spiritual, wonderful men I've ever met in my life. Talk about suffering. But his wife was sexually abused by her boyfriend at 18. And this has affected her so much that it has destroyed their marriage of 23 years. It is so sad. But she can't get away from this, you know, and it's something that she's got to bury so that she can get out of it. But she can't do that. And it's destroyed their marriage. And it's just so sad when you see that. You know, and then you have the people, you know, there are some ideas that we have to bury, you know, I think our ideas of the church, you know, there's some people who don't want to realize the fact that the church of the 1950s is no longer there. We are no longer living in the 1950s, and there are some people who'd love to have us bring that back. Well, it's not going to happen. We got to bury that, you know, and we got to move on, okay? And so, but I think there's some people who love to go back to that. They're afraid to change. They just don't want to have, you know, I think we got to bury some of those things. And I think that's an important thing to think about, you know. So I'm just asking all of you to think about, is there something in your life that you need to have buried so that you can rise? Now that is the other incredible thing about reconciliation in the private forum. I think it is an opportunity for people who carry some pain and guilt just to be able to get rid of it. And we need places to get rid of it. And so I certainly would encourage you, if there are things in your life that you need to, I think participation in reconciliation in the private forum is one of those ways that you can move forward in your life. And that can be a way to bury it, you know. And I would hope and encourage you to do that. So and we have the examination of conscience in there to think about. But I want you to think about that, because I think participation in that private forum can be a very powerful thing for people. And that's identifying with Jesus in his dying and rising. Burying things that are holding you back so that you can rise up as a whole new person. I think that's an important thing for you to think about.